Well, before starting my talk, I would like to say that I'm very happy today for 3 reasons. First, your invitation to be here. The second is to come back to Berkeley, where I received my PhD almost 40 years ago. I don't come to Berkeley every year, but when I have this possibility, it's really special. And the third point is that today is my birthday. So, 3 good reasons to be happy. Well, I'm going to talk about what's happening in Brazil when you look at the macroeconomics and at the same time at the labor market and income distribution. And this is very interesting, in my opinion, because the macroeconomics in Brazil is not very well. It's not working. The economy is not working very well if you consider the last 10 years, for instance. But at the same time that the economy is not going well, the labor market is improving a lot and income distribution also. So it's a sort of a puzzle that you have. How can you have a labor market that is improving and income distribution that is improving also at the same time that the economy is sort of not going well? And that's the idea. I will try to give my interpretation for these events. So I organize like this, just a short introduction with some information about what's happening in Brazil. And then I have selected some macroeconomic data to show you the economy. And then I will discuss the labor market, the evolution of income distribution, and then the final comments and future prospects for Brazil. Okay, no, that's the other way around. This one. Okay, just 8 points. The first one, the growth of the Brazilian economy was relatively small in the years 2000, with a clear slowdown from 2011 on. Okay, now you have this slowdown for 3 and 4 years. We can say the last 4 years we have this slowdown in the economy. Inflation remained close to the upper limit of the inflation target system that we have in Brazil, that's 6.5. And this is the upper limit. And since 2008, we are close to the upper limit. So in inflation terms, the results are not very good. Brazil has one of the highest interest rates in the world. That's another characteristic of our economy. The exchange rate remained overvalued in most years, although we have a sort of a devaluation in the last 2 years. The country showed increasing trade surplus until 2006, a very big one. When you see the exchange of goods with abroad, but since then it's decreasing, and recently it started to produce now, instead of increasing surplus, increasing deficits. We have a deficit in the current account. That means the exchange, all kind of exchange with the exterior, and the balance of payment has showing those deficits. There has been a fiscal effort, that means an effort to produce superavits in the country to keep the ratio of government debt to gross domestic product under control, to control the relation between the debt, the government debt, and the GDP, the gross domestic product. Despite the relatively low economic growth, although now 2 good results. Despite relatively low economic growth, the labor market has shown a very good performance since 2004. 2004 is the year of the changement in the labor market. And also Brazil is characterized by having high social inequalities, but unlike most countries, even US also, I think, the income distribution has improved a lot during last decade. So let's try to understand this. Yeah. I'll start with some macroeconomic data. Just some figures, some graph to show you. From 2004 to 2008, we had 5% of GDP increase. That's good result. But since then, we had the international crisis of 2009 that produced this with the GDP, and then a huge increase in the following year, 7.5. Then since then, we have just about 2.5, and this year it will be 0.5 maybe. The GDP will increase just 0.5%. Investment rate, this is another problem because investment rate in Brazil is very low. You know, it increased a little bit in the last 5 years, but you know, it's considered 18% is not enough for a country like Brazil as investment rate. So if you consider other Latin American countries, they have 20, 22, 23, 24, 25%. So this is considered very low investment rate, and the country cannot make to change this. Inflation rate, as I mentioned you, the limit, superior limit of the target is 6.5, and we are close to 6.5 since 2008. But before it was worse, but anyway, in the last years we have a sort of high inflation. Interest rate is also very, very high in Brazil. Right now it is 11, I mean interest rate, I'm talking about the basic one, the lowest interest rate that's called Selic. The level now is 11%. That means very high, because inflation 6.5 with an interest rate of 11% show that you have 5% of real interest rate. It's very, very huge for the if you compare with other countries. This is another data that's very interesting. The net debt of public sector. If you consider the total debt of public sector is decreasing from 55% of GDP to something like 35%. So this is good. But what happens that the external debt, today you don't have, the government has no external debt. If it's negative, that means you have it's the exterior that has debt with you. But the internal debt increased in relation to the GDP, so it's like exchanging external debt by internal debt. But anyway, this data is not bad in the sense that if you consider total public net debt, you have a decrease as percentage of GDP. Exchange rate, it was very, very here. It was very overvalued, and we had some. Up means devaluation, so we had some devaluation of the exchange rate in Brazil in the last 2 years. But it seems that it was not enough to change the exchange with the exterior of the other countries, foreign countries. This one, yeah. This is just confirm that until the whole decade we had more exports than imports. So you had a surplus in the external exchange with the rest of the world. But this surplus is disappearing. And this year, maybe, I don't know, but maybe we will have a very small one or maybe a negative one. But if you consider 2006, for instance, you had like $40 billion of superavity in the external balance of. Okay, this is the external trade surplus. This is the result of the other graphic I show you. This was the $45 billion in 2006 of surplus, and the surplus almost disappearing. This is the current account balance. That means all exchanges with the exterior, and we had until during this period we had a superavity of almost 2% of the GDP. but right now we have a very big deficit with the exterior of almost 4%. The external debt is increasing. It's normal if you cannot produce supergravity in your exchange with exterior. It's normal that you have an external debt that's increasing. Summary of the macroeconomic results. 10 minutes, okay. I have to control my time, of course. 6 points, the summary of the macroeconomic results. First, the performance of the Brazilian economy in recent years has been relatively mediocre, with little GDP growth, high inflation, soaring interest rates, and low investment rates. All bad information. Everything is bad, what I mentioned, like four items. But since 2011, the economy has presented great difficulty to maintain GDP growth last 3 years. In the triennium 2011-2013, GDP growth was close to 2% a year. And this year, it will be around 0.5%. So you have really, as GDP, if you look at GDP, there is a slowdown that's coming very, very strong. The high trade surplus are rapidly shrinking, and the current account deficit is increasing. So far, there were no difficulties to finance this deficit with external resource. But if the deficits keep growing, it can present problems in the future to be financed by external resource. The exchange rate devaluation of last 2 years was not enough to improve the country's external accounts. Despite the low economic growth, the economy rate, the interest rate is currently at a very high level, as I mentioned. But the main reason is due to the difficulties in reducing inflation. So to reduce inflation, you have to increase the interest rate, and so you pay a price of not having economic growth. And the short term, finally, the short-term prospects for the economy, in my opinion, are unfavorable. Well, now we change the subject. It is more interesting, this, I think. And you too, huh? Yes. The labor market. The results in the labor market are very positive, in my opinion. I'm going to show you some of them. Unemployment rate. In 10 years, it came from 12% to 5%. So it's amazing, to have this behavior during 10 years, mainly if you consider that the economy was not that good. Okay, during part of from here to here, okay, the economy was working fine. But since then, you have this slowdown. And although we have this slowdown, you see the unemployment rate is decreasing. I have to talk about the current policy for minimum wage that you have. This is a very special one, because this is a law. It's defined by the Congress. It's it's applied for many years. We have an annual adjustment for the minimum wage according to the consumer price index, in the case INPC. That's our main consumer price index. Okay, every year you have this adjustment according to the inflation. But you have a real increase that's calculated by the growth rate of GDP in the 2 years earlier. That means you need some time to calculate the GDP growth, so you use the growth of 2 years before, but this is a real increase. And if you consider that from 2004 to 2008, we had almost 5% of increase every year in the GDP, this increase resulted in an increase in the same dimension for the minimum wage. So the minimum wage increased a lot. And now minimum wage is this, if you make just use the exchange rate, 724 means approximately 320 if you can make this comparison PPP, parity of power purchase. But anyway, this is just using the exchange rate. And here is the result. The results that from 2003 to 2013, we had an increase in minimum wage, a real increase in minimum wage of 75%. A real increase in minimum wage in 10 years. This is a lot. And of course, if you have this increase in minimum wage, we have also an increase in the average wage in the country, because there is some effect of minimum wage to the rest of the wage. So it's the same behavior of increasing for minimum wage and for average wages in the economy. I am using data from PME. PME is considered just, in this case, just six metropolitan regions. Thanks. Rio, São Paulo, Porto Alegre, Belo Horizonte, Recife, and Salvador. So, but are the most important capitals in the country, some of them. Okay, this result, average wage. This is another very good result, is formal employment. Formal employment considered as a percentage of total employment. Total employment in the country, PME, again, is the same six regions, and is a huge increase. Of course, you say 55% of formal employment is not that much, huh? But anyway, it was 45. So you had in 10 years an increase of 10 points in percentage for the formal employment in the country. Another good data is schooling. Here I'm considering percentage of workers with at least 11 years of schooling. And a huge increase also. People are going to school and studying, although the quality of school in Brazil is always very bad. And the last results of these exams that the children have to pass were very bad. So it's a very bad quality, bad as if you consider, but if you consider the number of years of schooling, it increased a lot. Creation of formal employment. This is another way of looking at formal employment. Instead of percentage of total employment formal, here I'm considering the creation, number of jobs created every year. And here I am using another source, CAGED. CAGED is another source that is all formal employment in Brazil. And you see 1.5 million jobs created every year from 2004 until 2008, around 1 million and 1.5 million employment. 2010, over 2 million employments in Brazil. But then, you see, with the slowdown of the economy, the number of formal employments are decreasing, and this year, 2014, it will continue to decrease. But anyway, it's impressive, these figures. But which kind of jobs are being created? Here, the data are not so good. Why? Because if you consider number of minimum wage, the different, up to 1 to 1.5, etc., just 20 minimum wage and plus, in the last 3 years, you see that the creation of formal jobs are concentrated here. That means up to 2 minimum wage. For the other levels of wage, you had negative liquid creation of jobs. That means no creation, destruction of jobs. So the country is creating jobs, but jobs that do not pay that well, okay? Up, the liquid positive is just up to 2 minimum wage. And where? In which sectors? And then you see that the jobs created are concentrated either in the service or in the trade. 9% in manufacturing industry, and the rest in other sectors. But in construction also, construction 80%. But you see that is here in the service and trade, it concentrates the creation of jobs. And usually they are not very good jobs, they do not pay that well. But that's where the jobs are being created. This is just to show you a quality index for the labor market that I created using 9 different variables. I don't have to read here for you, just 3 ones related to unemployment, the other 3 in income, and here formal employment, etc., and so on. And if you consider this and use the methodology like I'll call it IDH. The Human Development Index, IDH. It's very simple methodologies. But anyway, if you do this, you have this as a result. The quality index for the labor market using those 9 variables show an improvement in the 6 metropolitan regions, a clear improvement. You know, it can go from 0 to 1, so it varies from 0.5 to 0.8. That shows, considering those 9 variables, that they improved in the period. This is a point that usually people do not consider when they examine the labor market in Brazil, that we are having a demographic transition that is coming very, very, very fast. And so what we have here is that, you know, if you start from 15 years below, you have a decrease in the population. So you do not have, you don't have a pyramid anymore. We have, you know, it looks like a pyramid here, but then you have each time we are going to have less people entering the labor market in the future. And this is very important to consider to understand why unemployment rate decreased in this period, because the demographic transition helped a lot, in my opinion, for those good results in the labor market. Well, summary of labor market results. The labor market had a very good performance in the period, 2004-2013, especially when compared with the relatively poor performance of the economy. The unemployment rate fell year after year, except in 2009 due to the effects of the international crisis, despite the economic slowdown from 2011 on, the unemployment rate continues to fall. That's now sort of unusual result, but anyway, it continued, the unemployment rate continued to fall even after 2011. Minimum wage grew strongly by political decision of the government, contributing to the increase of the average labor income. Informality in the labor market decreased and the formal sector increased, but informality is still very high. The education level of workers has increased, but is still very low by international standards, because the average education for workers in Brazil is around 7 years of education. That's nothing. But it increased a lot in this period. So, good results. Good results. But why labor market created so many employments and the unemployment rate decreased so much? I gave already some hints, but here is organized in the sense that, first, employment generation is concentrated in the tertiary sector. Over 3 of each 4 employment jobs created, where average productivity is relatively low, favoring the absorption of less skilled labor. What I mean is that since productivity is so low in the tertiary sector, it's easier to create jobs in that sector. And it was exactly that sector that created most jobs in this period. Second, there was little growth on labor productivity, this is the second point, the productivity. There was little growth on labor productivity in the 70s. In the 70s, because I've been here in the 70s. But anyway, in the 2000s. The growth of labor productivity in the last decade was about 1% a year. That's very, very, very low. And there was a fall on labor productivity when you consider the service sector. What I mean, that if productivity is low, it is increasing very slowly, and in some sectors, like in the service sector, is decreasing. So in a situation like this, it's easier to create employments, but bad ones. That's the point. Not well paid. Finally, demographic transition has also favored the reduction of the unemployment rate, with fewer young people entering the labor market in the last years. The economically active population of young workers is decreasing, and that for people over 50 years is increasing. That means that this transition, in the demographic transition, changed a lot. Has important effects on the labor market. Okay, finish this, and now the last part of my talk. What happened with the income distribution and the social policy? To discuss income distribution in Brazil, you have to talk a little about the cash transfer programs. I believe that most of you know what Bolsa Família means, but anyway, I have some data here showing that Bolsa Família, that was created by President Lula, benefits now 14 million households, which corresponds to a total of 48 million people. 48 million people means 1/4 of Brazilian population. So it's a very important it's a very important program that touches a lot of people. The average monthly benefit is 150 reais. That means $70 approximately. You can just divide by 2 and take 10%, and you make the calculation. And it costs almost nothing. No, not of course, 25 billion reais is a lot of money, but if you compare with the GDP, it's just 0.5% of GDP. The important program that costs very low, 0.5%. If you consider interest paid by government, you have like 5-6% of GDP every year. Of course, not paid because you have new debts and go ahead. But anyway, 0.5% is not too much. And the other one that's less known, that's called benefício de prestação continuada, is a transfer resource to 4 million elderly and or disabled poor people. And the value of the benefit is one minimum wage, a minimum wage that is increasing. That is the value, the monthly value paid to these 4 million elderly and disabled people every month. And this program costs more, costs 0.7% of GDP. And if you consider also the general social security system, the official system, security system of the country, it's a contributory official mechanism which benefits about 24 million retirees and pensioners, of which approximately two-thirds of people receiving benefits from the official system in Brazil receive exactly one minimum wage. So with the increase of minimum wage, these people were benefited. Okay. This is just to show the evolution of number of families receiving Bolsa Família, 14 million families now. This is the amount of money that's transferred to people in the last years. The last year I have here is 2012. That means this is 2 billion reais. This is in 1 month. That means every month there is this transfer of 2 billion reais, that's a little bit lower than $1 billion, every month to the people benefited by Bolsa Família. So there is an important transfer of money to those families. And then I show you the results as different forms of analyzing income distribution. If you consider the average income of the 10% richest and 40% poorest, the relation between those average incomes decreased from 23 to 15. So it is still a high relation. There is a big inequality, but it was much bigger here than here. And if you look, the relation of average income of 20% richest and poorest, also the same result, 27 to something like 17%. So a decrease, a strong decrease. And finally, the Gini index that people use a lot. Gini index also decreased from 0.6 to something like 0.53. It's still very high, huge inequality. But anyway, the movement is clear of improvement. This is another way of look at the income distribution, function of the income distribution. That means the red one is remuneração, means the labor income. This is labor income. This is capital income, excedente operacional bruto, that is profits and capital income. And the green one is the tax on production. And finally, this is mixed income. Mixed income is mainly income from independent workers in the informal sector. So with the increase of formal sector, decrease of formal sector, decrease the informal, there was a decrease in the participation. This is just, if you add up, you have 100% of GDP. Is how GDP is distributed among workers and enterprise, and this is the government taxes, and this is informal sector. So you see a change. There is a change here from 2004 on. That there was this increase in the income of workers in general. Well, just 2 more minutes. Why income distribution improved? According to many authors, it was a combination of both improvement in the labor market along with the programs of income transfer. So one side labor market, the other side income transfer. But there is unanimity, however, that the labor market had a much more important role than cash transfer programs to improve income distribution. This everybody agrees with this, because the money that you generate in the labor market is incomparable with the money transferred using Bolsa Família and the other official programs. According to some estimates, 50% of the improvement of income distribution in recent years are due to the Bolsa Família program. It's a lot, 15%, anyway. 25% to the official pension and retirement system that I showed you, that most people here receive the minimum wage. With the remainder of improvement, about 60% resulting from income generated in the labor market. So this was my colleague Lena Lavinas that produced those results. It's recognized the important role of minimum wage. Everybody recognizes this. The important role of minimum wage increase on the improvement of income distribution through 3 effects. First, on labor market in general, basic remuneration. On the floor of the benefit of social security system, also I mentioned. And through the welfare benefits such as BPC, benefício prestação continuada, that the benefits equal to 1 minimum wage. So if the minimum wage increase, there is a transfer of income transfer for those people. If from the point of view of functional income distribution, its improvement is also associated with increase increased formalization of the labor market and the wage growth above, this is, we start to talk about now, the wage growth above the increase in labor productivity. Now I will discuss this relation of the income and productivity, labor productivity. Okay, concluding remarks and prospects. 2, 4, 6, 8 points. The Brazilian economy is in a situation where several macroeconomic indicators show stagnation or worsening trend, such as little GDP growth, high inflation, high interest rates, low investment, reduction of trade balance surplus, current account deficit, and so on. So, Brazilian economy in a bad situation right now. People are very pessimistic about the future of the economy, at least in the short term. Despite the poor performance of the economy, labor market has surprised, showing some favorable results with falling unemployment, strong job creation, increase in average labor income, and greater formalization of labor relations. Those positive data. Favored by the good behavior of the labor market, by the increase of minimum wage, and by government income transfer programs such as Bolsa Família, there has been improvement on income distribution, which remains, however, is still quite unequal when compared to international standard. Fourth point, future economic growth depends on the recovery of investments and also on the increase of labor productivity. This is very important, at the risk of lack of workers because of the transition, the demographic transition, including unskilled ones. That could be a problem. You don't have new workers even if they are unskilled. That's a possibility. The strong demographic transition makes this situation still more difficult. Next point, the higher level of education of the employed population, increased level of education of the employed population has contributed little to the increase of labor productivity. Why? I show that the labor productivity data are very negative, just very, either decrease in the tertiary sector or a very slow increase. But at the same time, you have more people going to school. What means? It means that the school is not working. There is a problem of quality of school because people are going, studying, having more years of schooling, but the labor productivity is still the same. So we have a problem here. Hence, the need to improve the quality of public and private education. That's a very important point. Another one, given the level already achieved by minimum wage increased a lot, I showed you, and the unfavorable prospects for the economy in the short term, minimum wage should contribute less to improve income distribution in the future. What I mean? I mean that minimum wage increased a lot, okay? Minimum wage depends, with the law for the minimum wage now, depends on the growth of the economy to increase, and the possibility of growth for the economy in the next years are very negative, so the possibility to continue increasing minimum wage is lower than it was in the past if you continue to have the same legislation. Okay? So the capacity of using minimum wage to improve income distribution is limited now. To improve income distribution through the labor market in the future, it will be necessary to increase the labor productivity, mainly for the less qualified workers. What I mean? I mean to increase the level of wage for less qualified workers. Either you use minimum wage or we increase the labor productivity of those people, the people that are in the base of the income distribution. So one way is to increase the productivity, since the possibilities to increase the minimum wage are limited. And finally, The continued improvement of income distribution via income transfer, as in the case of Bolsa Família, depends on the increase of the value of the benefits, to the extent that virtually the entire target population is already included in the program. I mean, the focus of this program is directed to very poor people. And if all people that should be considered to receive the benefit, practically all of them are already in the program. So how can you improve income distribution, transferring money to those people? The only possibility is increasing the value of the benefit for these people. So those are the concluding remarks about macroeconomy, labor market, and income distribution in Brazil, and possibilities for the future. As you can see, I'm not very optimistic about. Most people are not, at least in the short term. We have important problems in the economy, but even with an economy that didn't work well in the last decade, we had good results. And people keep the whole time asking, but how come with this economy that's not growing, that you are generating so many jobs and improving the income distribution? I try to give my explanation, my interpretation for what's happening, and also to show the problems. Okay? Thank you very much. I talked more. I talked too much.
But we still have some minutes for questions. I don't know if there are any questions for Professor Saboia.
If I understood you correctly, you said investments in the Brazilian economy has decreased, both from within and from outside of Brazil. Is that correct?
No, what I said is that the investment rate in Brazil is very low. It's lower than it should be if you want to increase the economy in the future. Because if you don't have an investment rate that's enough to increase the possibility of production of the economy, you cannot have growth. Because even if you have demand, you cannot answer, you cannot produce to satisfy that demand. We don't have problem of foreign investment. We have this 4% of GDP as deficit in the current account. That means all kind of exchange of goods, exchange of service with the exterior. But we are getting this the resource from the exterior to cover this deficit. So we don't have problem here. But if this deficit continue to increase, because now it's 3.8%, if next year 4.5, 5%, etc., then it's dangerous because it's too big, it's too much, and you can have a difficulty to get foreign capital to cover this deficit. But right now, this is not a problem.
So right now, the foreign investment is covering the deficit as it stands, but if the deficit grows, then the foreign investments won't be enough.
If the last point,
if the deficit continues to grow, the foreign investments won't be enough to cover the deficit.
that's a point. People agree with this in general, and myself also. But for the time being, it is under control, and no problem in this area. Okay?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, it's a fascinating argument, yours, because you're separating economic growth, which is kind of a mantra, or an economic religion worldwide. You need your economy to grow in order to create jobs and to make people happier and more, have more purchasing power, etc. You're showing that the economy doesn't grow that much, and there is a huge improvement. Maybe not ideal, not to an ideal point, far from that. But a strong recovery of the ability to consume and to get some education, etc. So unpacking these two things seems like something really surprising in a
Yeah,
positive
but
sense.
there are limits.
I know.
I
know.
try to show the limits.
Of course.
It did work,
Yeah.
but it cannot work forever this way.
No. Yes.
But okay.
No. My point is that I understand the pessimistic stance towards the future, but just I mean, I'm a historian, so looking at the long-term patterns of inequality in Brazil,
Yeah.
this change in the trend in the past 10 years is really,
Yeah.
just from the perspective of the numbers, it's
Yeah, to
surprising.
decrease the Gini index from 0.6 to 0.53 for Brazil is impressive, because it's a very good result. But 0.53 is still very high. It's one of the highest. But you know, we are going in the other sense, because most countries, and the United States also, the income distribution is worsening. And the United States has a very high Gini index also. The income distribution in the United States is not good at all. If you compare with Europe, if you compare with the Scandinavian countries, and not very good in the worsening here. And Brazil, at least, could improve a little bit, even with the economy not going. If you consider 2004 to 2008, the economy was fine. There was a discussion. People, my colleagues abroad, say, "Wow, Brazil is going fine." Well, but after the international crisis of 2008-9, the situation changed completely in the country, and now we have people are very pessimistic. You know, my colleagues, because you know, the Dilma government, the President Dilma, we are going to have an average less than 2% of growth. It's very, very low for Brazil. To be the worst result if you compare Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Lula, and Dilma. Dilma, in terms of growth of the economy, will have the worst result.
Can I add something just to
Sure.
that? You know, if you look at the size of the Brazilian economy from Cardoso's government to Lula's and then Dilma, Brazil in like 10, 15 years became like the fifth or sixth economy.
Yeah, 6, 7,
or
depends.
7. But I mean, the bigger your economy, the harder it is to keep growing unless you're China at Chinese rates.
Mhm.
You know, 7%, 8%. I don't know what's the rate of economic growth in the U.S. in the past 5, 10 years. It's probably less than 1%.
Maybe, I don't know. I
Maybe,
don't know.
but,
I don't have
but I mean, it's
figures.
slow as well. Just making some comparisons.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Happy birthday.
Thanks a lot.
One of the things that I think is interesting is that even though it's grown very slowly, the actual policies of the Dilma government have been to stimulate growth. So like cutting taxes on consumption of automobiles and the PAC, you know, investments in infrastructure and in housing and these kinds of things. So why would you say that despite these kinds of stimulative policies that there's been?
Okay, from the government side, the investment rate, the public investment rate is very low, because you cannot, it couldn't be much higher. So there is a question of how the economy is optimistic about the future, so that the investors, the private investor, will make real investment. In the last years, you know, people are not very happy. I mean, investors. I mean, the capital. They are not very happy with her government. You know, and so, you know, if the expectation for about the future of the economy is not very good, there is no investment. The investment is very, very low. But I agree with you because they made a big effort in 2009 to hold the economy. We had 0.5%, I think, negative of GDP in 2009, but it could be much worse. But okay, for 1 year it will work. But you know, consumption, for instance, credit for the population, it increased a lot. People took credit, you know, they have huge debts. The families have huge debts to pay. And so they cannot take other credit and buy again. So there is a limit. Because since investments are not very good, the other possibility is to increase consumption. Then the credit is very important, but there is also a limit, because if people are very indebted, they cannot take anymore. So I think the economy went just to the limit. And now you need something else to start again to grow the economy. But there is this feeling, pessimistic feeling in the country right now. This is bad. Even with the elections now, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I think many people are very happy. People that are against Dilma, they are very happy with the possibility that Marina will become the next president. But people, we don't know what will be Marina government. There is no idea. I don't know. It was an accident that, you know, it shouldn't be Marina there right now. But okay. But anyway, it will be a change, a changement. Sure.
So, looking at the graphs you showed us, wouldn't you say this looks could be seen as a political X-ray of a populistic government in the past decade? The second term of Lula, the first term, he was like God coming to Brazil and solving all the problems. The people loved him. Second term, he started doing, you know, the hard deals. And what I'm suggesting is, okay, where I work in the Amazon, the Bolsa Familia is like, wow, it's total change in people's lives and stuff. Many people even call it in Brazil, you know, the official scheme of buying votes, right? Anyway, but then this focus on creating, exactly like you explained to us, low-skilled jobs. Well, of course, you can open like millions of job places for low-skilled people, like with the immense big works in the empreiteiros and stuff like that. You can have millions and millions and millions of workers. And so if the focus is not exactly growing a strong economy, but just growing like a bigger base of voters, that would be like what I would do.
Okay, that's an interpretation. That's a good one. But anyway, the creation of jobs is not the government that creates jobs. It's the private sector. And they create jobs, most bad jobs, some good jobs, and the unemployment rate decrease a lot. This is good for votes. To increase minimum wage is very good to get votes. But it's good for the people too. So that's why. But okay, that's a possibility. Many people say that the governments use populistic tactic to win election. But it seems that this time it will not work. Dilma has no charm, you know. She's not like Lula. Lula is someone that, you know, has his way of talking to people.
Some say that Lula picked her exactly because she doesn't have any charisma. Otherwise...
But then he could be candidate now. Why not? Why not?
Well...
Why finally... I think she started to like being president.
Who doesn't? Power corrupts.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
Okay.
Are there any more questions? Yeah.
I'm working on my Portuguese, so I'm talking to a lot of Brazilians through Skype. And the one thing I always hear from them is that the taxes are so high. They say, you know, like you go anything from McDonald's to like products, it's like almost 3 times what it would cost in the U.S. And they attribute it to high taxes. So where are the taxes going?
The taxes are very high. It's like 36% of GDP is total tax in the country. For a country like Brazil, it's very high. Mainly because, you know, countries, I don't know here in the US I would say maybe in the US it's less than this, but if you go to Europe, the rate of tax to the GDP is higher. But the point is that they give back you know, your tax. And in Brazil, the service that the government pay to the people, offer to the people, the quality is questionable, it's complicated. So, but I think it's impossible to increase much more taxes in Brazil because it's already very high. They will try again, but you know, maybe 1 point or another point in percentage of GDP, but it's already very high. And this makes, when you compare price, you know, internal price in Brazil with in other countries, in some prices are really very high. And the taxes are included in those prices. They have their role to increase price in Brazil.
Depressing.
No, don't get depressed. No, go ahead with your Portuguese class.
I want to thank Professor Saboia for coming here today and for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.